Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Ogti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
In this episode, Aaron and Trishul discuss the final domain of well-being, health, both physical and mental. They try to distinguish between the two aspects before agreeing that they are probably too interrelated for a distinction to be made. When choosing activities to better your physical health, you may be helping your mental health without even realizing it. It is normal to go through ebbs and flows where periods of healthy activities can sustain you through challenging times. In the end, it's not necessarily the drastic changes, but the little nudges over long periods that can have the biggest impact. And now, on to our conversation.
Hi, my name is Aaron Ogti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hi, Aaron. How are you doing?
I'm doing well today. How are you doing today?
I'm also doing well.
Great. So in the last few episodes, we've been talking about the different domains of well-being and kind of how that relates to happiness research, where it differs. We first started with financial well-being, and this really was a foundational aspect for trying to achieve these other focuses on just how to live a happy, fulfilled life. We also talked about family, friends, and communities, how those are fairly universal across humanity, that people laughing and smiling, they tend to be doing it with others. We talked about work and activities and the value that people derive from these parts of their lives. Even when they're not happy, they might still be stressed, but they feel value and they find that it adds to their overall well-being. And today we're kind of getting into the fourth domain of well-being. That's health, both physical and mental. So I have a few kind of conversations and thoughts and observations I've had with other clients, but I wanted to get your kind of opening take. When I say that the kind of fourth domain of well-being is health, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you, Trishul?
Well, the two main things are mental and physical. And I honestly think mental takes the cake here. So that's something I'd like to talk about as this conversation unfolds.
Okay. I'm actually surprised. So my observations with clients has actually been almost more on the physical side, where clients that I have that are already financially independent, they tend to be older and retired, so that's a factor. But if they have achieved kind of all of those other things we mentioned, they're financially independent, they have a good friends and family network, they've already built these successful careers, so they've already kind of derived that value. If you were to ask kind of the people who have it all kind of thing, what do you want? All they'll ask is to be healthy. If you ask anyone over 60 or listen into the conversations between them, they'll keep bringing up health and kind of lucky to be alive, and they'll keep focusing on that. And I think that is something to keep in mind even at a younger age. My first thought was just physical health, like the ability to get out and do those other things, to go out and do some work or go out and meet up with friends and family. But it sounds like you have a different take on that. So what do you mean? Why do you think that mental health is more important?
I kind of see it like one leading the other. So from my perspective, if you have the mental health, it's a lot easier to be physically healthy. You have more of the ability to motivate yourself and put practices into place that lead to physical and social health. But if you have poor mental health, or if you're struggling with mental health, I think everything else seems to fall apart. So I think that's kind of why I say what I say.
Do you have any thoughts or examples or anything, kind of a specific story?
Well, what I think about is, for example, you look at somebody like Stephen Hawking, who passed away not too long ago, where all he really had was his brain, but his entire body eroded for decades, basically. but he was still able to function at some level because of his mental capacity, yes, but also his mental health. The fact that he was able to stay lucid and push forward and persevere besides all the physical struggle that he faced. And then I think of the notion that if you find somebody who is in good physical shape and doing well with that, but still struggling mentally, I feel like that'll be troublesome because over time, the mental will start making the physical harder to deal with.
That's interesting. Okay, so I might ask you a little deeper in a little bit, but I might be coming around because one of the things I that just came to mind, we had talked about it a while ago, was like the when it comes to happiness research about people having a baseline of happiness. We talked about both in the context of lottery winners, where several years after, if they were unhappy before winning lottery, they're still unhappy after winning lottery. There's a big spike in the short term, but long term, they kind of get back to their baseline. And on the flip side, it's the same thing for amputees, where it is a big drop in their overall happiness in the short term, but eventually they get back to their baseline. So maybe that does support kind of your take that even if you like literally lost a limb and you can no longer do any of the physical things that you could do before, if you still have the right mental health and you're still in the right situation to maintain your mental health, that you could still be just as happy.
Right. Like, I guess the question I would pose to you, Aaron, is let's put a hypothetical out there. In scenario A, you have great mental capacity and mental health, but your body is suffering and going through something quite traumatic. Maybe you found out you have cancer or something. And, in the second bucket, you have exquisite physical health, but your mental health is deteriorating to the point where you're, severely stressed or depressed or anxious. Which one of the two do you think would be easier to deal with or overcome, or which one do you think you would like to find yourself in if you had to choose?
So I think just obviously I'd want the mental health. I feel like just the way you frame the question
Okay,
is
I was probably leading the witness here.
a little bit. And I guess when I think of mental health, I guess I tend to think of it as tied to physical health. I think that when I think about the two, I think there's a strong correlation. And I tend to think of it kind of, I've seen it in retirees, I've seen it in my grandparents, and it was kind of as soon as some of their mental health issues developed, they were also becoming less mobile, and their general quality of life degraded relatively quickly. And so when I think of mental health, I tend to think of things like dementia and end of life mental health, where those who are in their 60s or 70s, if they maintain their physical health, they actually tend to maintain their mental health as well. That the getting out of the house, being ambulatory, not being solitary, those are the things that provide their mental health throughout the final decades of their life. But it might be different from what you're thinking about of what about someone in their 40s or 50s? And maybe it's not a dementia related mental health, but other mental health issues.
I think either way, you're onto a good point, meaning that they're both interrelated from the perspective that, yes, certainly, if you want to maintain good mental health, maintaining good physical health helps. There's certainly many studies to back this up. For example, the notion that if you take walks regularly, you'll probably feel better. People who practice yoga, for example, there was a study last year showing that practicing yoga, physical activity, helped reduce psychological distress and paranoid thoughts of people in the inmate population. So you can even see the notion that having outdoor exercise where you're just doing something simple like walking around and saying nice thoughts, this notion of there was a study that looked at people who practice this something called loving kindness, saying I wish for myself to be happy, saying good things like that. That led to positive well-being among these participants in this particular study. So I think they're definitely intertwined. That the fact that you can foster mental health through physical, and I certainly think it goes the other way as well, meaning if you're mentally healthy or if you want to be mentally healthy, being physically healthy or focusing on physical health will help you get there.
So okay, so yeah, there's kind of supporting that interrelatedness, and maybe when we're thinking about the two, if we're trying to kind of separate them, we end up thinking more in terms of disease or problems, but more acute issues, where it might be easier to combat an acute physical health issue than an acute mental health issue. But for overall lifestyle and kind of, again, well-being in life, they probably are more tied to the other, where it's the general healthy habits that support both physical mental health or physical health and mental health. But it's harder to kind of look at the big picture over a span of years and make those decisions around, okay, I'm going to exercise for the purpose of mental health today, where maybe in terms of kind of life application, if you think I'm going to exercise for the purpose of my physical health, you're also helping your mental health. It's the initiative to go on those walks or take up yoga or something like that, that people tend to think in terms of physical health, even though they're actually helping both.
That makes sense to me. Perhaps there's this reductionist argument that anything we do, it's to drive our happiness. And from that standpoint, when we exercise, we want to be more healthy, to be more happy. When we focus on our mental health, we want to be more happy as well. And I think there's also some interesting nuance there when it comes to things that you wouldn't even think of, like pain. When somebody is feeling pain, it's something's bad happening. Maybe it's chronic pain and they have a backache, for example. But there's actually two things going on there. One is the actual physical pain. But something we're learning now is there's actually this notion of emotional pain associated with such conditions. So, as you might know, that there's a lot of focus on opiates recently that's been causing a lot of addiction problems within the United States, and that's been targeting the physical pain. But there's been some research now that's actually looking at how do we tackle the emotional pain that might come up with these types of individuals who are suffering. And if we can target that, might that help the overall pain of an individual? So that's something that researchers at Washington University School of Medicine looked at. They looked at a rodent model looking at rats to see if they can somehow get that emotional pain under control. And they were actually able to do that by finding a mechanism to keep it in control. And that led the rats to still feel the physical pain, but by quelling that emotional pain, the rats became more motivated to kind of improve themselves and get better, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I have some thoughts, but really quick. How do they measure the rat's emotional pain? And like, how do they know when they're resolving and healing some of the rat's emotional pain? like, I'm glad there's good science on this and we're doing this, but I'm really curious. How do you measure rats' emotional pain?
Okay, so this was in the journal Neuron, and I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm going to have to paraphrase and titrate as best I can. But basically, you have your standard opiate painkillers that target receptors in the brain for the physical pain, like morphine and oxycodone and fentanyl, things like that. But there's other receptors that we happen to know about. I'm not sure exactly how, but they operate differently. These types of receptors are the ones that make people depressed and sad and unmotivated. So it's a different type of pain, right?
Okay.
It's not physical. And what they were able to do is block those other types of receptors and dampen them. And they found that the rats were more motivated. So that's the high level, non-neuroscientist layman's interpretation.
That's close enough. That's close enough. It does sound like it involves functional MRIs and like looking at the actual brain chemistry of rats rather than like just asking them if they're happy.
Yeah, they probably didn't give them tests or Myers-Briggs exams or things like that.
The 1 to 10 scale of, are you happy today?
Right.
Okay, so thank you for that. I have scratched that itch and I'm no longer concerned how we measure rats' emotional pain. But one of the things I wanted to get back to was you had mentioned yoga, and when dealing with emotional pain or like focusing on mental health, like the mental health exercises, one of the things that has come out is the general idea of taking time for internal reflection, where you're trying to shut out a lot of the ongoing day-to-day life-to-life stress and just kind of be in the moment. It's the classic stop and smell the roses, and it's has manifested itself over centuries, usually from yoga, the idea of meditation or prayer, and it's developed a modern name of mindfulness, that it does not have to have a religious or spiritual intonation, but this practice of sitting down calmly, could do it on walks, it can go along with physical activity, but trying to be in the moment and kind of observing your surroundings without letting them preoccupy your brain has shown to improve mental health. And actually, my daughter, who's in 3rd grade, they are teaching her mindfulness. And she is now asking me to help her with her mindfulness homework, where we schedule 20 or 30 minutes, sit down, and she's teaching me how to go through mindfulness.
That's pretty neat.
I've seen the data, I've seen the research, and I know it's important. And I love my daughter and want to help with her homework. But in the moment, and I can see all the skepticism, it's like in the moment, it's like, is this really going to do anything? I can feel as I'm going through this.
They say one of the hardest things for a man to do is to sit alone in a room, quiet by himself.
Well, so maybe for me personally, because this is my oldest daughter, I have 2 other kids, that the other 2 kids can't ever leave me alone for 20 minutes to actually go through this mindfulness exercise. That's my current guess. But I've heard doctors talk about how like mindfulness works, but if they call it meditation, the patients won't do it. If they call it prayer, the patients won't do it unless they were already religiously inclined to pray in the first place.
Right.
But it's this practice, and once you kind of learn about why and how it works, and then you see, oh no, humans have been doing this for centuries already. They've just been calling it different things. And there's a reason why Buddhist monks kind of have this really high mental health and well-being, is because they practice things like this, and why yoga has shown to be effective at both mental and physical health over centuries. And prayer works in terms of helping those who pray. And mindfulness is the kind of taking all the other political lifestyle and theology out of it, just focusing on the actual health benefits. And I'm still, I don't practice it well enough, but I do love the idea that educators are seeing kind of between social media and the internet and just the society that we're in now, that's going a mile a minute and you're always on and you're never off, to actually give children the skills to incorporate mental health over the next few decades is really encouraging to me.
That does sound encouraging. I think the perspective that we bring to the table of traditional mental health is, kind of talking it out with a therapist, or maybe trying to reflect on one's issues on their own, or self-help books and things like that. But when it comes to mindfulness, I see why it can make sense anecdotally, kind of for the same reasons that you brought up. For example, I feel like in today's society, the way things are driven is you can literally occupy your brain with thoughts from the second you get up to the moment you pass out at night, by always being surrounded by things that can grab your attention, that can pull you into thinking about things that happened in the past that you need to deal with, or things that are going to happen in the future that you need to deal with. And you can literally spend weeks without even pausing for a moment and, like you said, reflect, smelling the roses. So I can see why this type of thing has been around for a while, or a long time, or centuries, but also why it may be helpful in today's society where it can easily get overlooked. As you mentioned, physical health will help, but even in that yoga study that I mentioned, they had a control group where the control group was inmates who did exercise for 90 minutes, and the other inmates in the actual study exercised with yoga for 90 minutes. So what they showed is that people showed positive benefits in both cases. Exercising and yoga are great. But what they also showed, or what was new to the study, is that the people in the yoga group had symptoms of depression, anxiety, and hostility that were improved. Also improved memory and concentration, and a reduction in obsessive thoughts. So in addition to the physical benefits, it seems like there's more going on with the ability to be mindful and fostering that. So it seems to align with what you just said in your thinking as well.
Okay. And that's, I didn't even know that part of the study. It's really interesting that came out. And I think the other examples I'd seen were in running. Runners tend to have similar benefits. So it wasn't necessarily yoga specifically, but there is something about the being alone with your thoughts, but kind of learning how to accept them. It's not trying to push them away. It's not trying to change them. It's not trying to dwell on them, but it is kind of letting the thoughts come in and then letting them go out in a way. And I'm not going to try and be a mindfulness teacher right now, but there were a couple sessions at a couple conferences on mindfulness. So I have like the super introductory version of what mindfulness is, and if you want to learn more, to go actually seek a teacher.
Right.
But your thought on the therapist almost feels like using a personal trainer for mental health, where sometimes you actually do need that professional help to get there. And other people, if you want to improve your physical health, just eat better and exercise more. Like, it almost doesn't matter what the exercise is. Could be running, could be going to a stairmaster, could be bench press, like it could be CrossFit. There's so many things that you could do, but the personal trainers add this layer of accountability and motivation. And that sounds like maybe that's how therapists can actively help with mental health.
I think so. I get the feeling there's probably two main things going on with therapy. One is the accountability aspect, and two is I I feel like we as humans, the way we process things is we need to help digest things by kind of explaining it out to ourselves and out loud to others. That's kind of how we, I think, learn and how we digest. For example, there's this notion of the reason we dream is because our mind likes to replay things, and when it replays things, that's how it like files things away and digests them. So I feel like that's kind of what seems to happen with therapy. And I think also in replaying things, it helps individuals to feel kind of validated in how they're feeling and thinking, to be able to bounce that off another human. So I think there's some benefit there as well. But yes, certainly at the same time, I think there's the notion that you mentioned of also having accountability in what one is doing. In addition, for example, when you're seeing a life coach or a personal trainer or even a financial coach, what we're really also trying to do is alter behavior. So I think that's a part of what goes on with mental health as well. The notion that sometimes we know we're not acting in our best interests, or we have some cognitive distortions that probably push us in a direction that's not entirely beneficial, but having somebody nudge us back on the right track is certainly helpful.
And I want to make clear, I'm not trying to discount therapists for any means. There's definitely a layer of professional training and education, that there's a reason why a CFP is a better financial coach than just someone who took an economics class in college. There's a reason why a professional trainer or personal trainer who has degrees in kinesiology understands just how the physical motion of muscles and bones and tendons work together to teach you proper form when you're doing squats. That matters. So the education and licensing and training for therapists also really matters. You really don't want to be doing therapy as a hobby kind of thing.
Right.
But I think you're right. It's more than what you could do by yourself. It's not just the education. It's having that other person. So my kind of final things for you are there things that you do in your life to help improve your physical and or mental health? Or maybe I should say mental health and then physical health.
I think the way things ebb and flow with my life is when things are smooth, I try to build in some of these things so that when things get a little rougher, they're there to provide some sort of safety net.
What do you mean by that?
So what I mean is you want to put in sprinklers in your home before the fire starts, right? You want to buy the home insurance before the hurricane is bearing down on your door. So when I'm able to, I try to institute more and more of these things that are helpful from a physical and mental standpoint. Like specifically, when things are better, I do actually try to put in some time for mindfulness throughout my day, over the course of my day, maybe a few minutes here and there. And when I am able to, I like the notion of taking daily walks just to be able to let my mind settle and also be able to be outdoors a little bit more. And also, I like physical activity, but it tends to be a little more seasonal, either snowboarding in the winter or something like scuba diving or swimming in the summers. So the goal there is when things end up getting a little more tumultuous, like we tend to move around a lot, and when you're in moving mode, you can't really budget or square time away for little things that you want to have within your routine, but there just isn't enough time given that you're, living out of a suitcase or you're on the road and things like that. That's kind of been my approach to keeping myself in line, and I think it's kind of helped. I certainly wish I could do more, but I also realize I'm slowly nudging myself in the right direction by creating a opportunity to have more of that time freedom with my business and my personal life. So I think so far I'm quite satisfied with that. How about you, Aaron? What do you do on your end?
I had my answer prepared, but based on what you said, I actually realized you're probably I was not doing it intentionally, but there's definitely ebbs and flows and a seasonality. I'm in the Bay Area, so I do go skiing, but like I don't have to change my day to day because it's snowing outside. Like so from that perspective, I can kind of do things year round. But maybe it's just because of kids and school schedules. I have definitely noticed there I will go through periods where I will get on the Stairmaster 3 days a week. And I'll do that for a few months. And it's like I'm doing it enough to establish the habit. And then something changes, whether you go on a vacation or kids are out of school or I need to take care of other things, and I'll go a couple months without doing it. And it's like I don't I had not even really considered like the idea that it just could be an ebb and flow thing, but maybe the idea that when I do have the time, I do make that a priority. I try and play sports, do slow pitch softball. I go skiing. I try and play golf when I can. I think the thing I love about golf is just being outside and walking around for a few hours. This morning, I walked my daughters to school, and over the last few weeks, last couple months, I've been actually reaching out to other parents of friends of my daughters and letting them know if they drop their daughters off at my house 30 minutes before school, I'll walk all of them to school. So trying to walk to school and walk back home has been one of the things that I try and do throughout the year. Sometimes when I go pick them up, I will carry their scooters and then I will run back home with them. So that's one of the things I can add like a 10-minute mile run into my weekly exercise. But I tend to look for opportunities to be outside and do things that are time inefficient but are better for my health.
It sounds like you are trying, and I get the feeling you are in okay health. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's one of those things like just based on my build, I've never been thin or skinny, but my blood pressure is really low, my pulse is really low. I go donate platelets, and so all of the statistics that they have look really good for me, except for probably my weight. So it's like I can still run and do pull-ups and do push-ups. So I'm decently athletic from that regard, but I'm definitely not the healthiest I could be. I do not look like I do CrossFit.
So besides that last point, it sounds like you found a pretty okay balance.
I, see, I think I would have never described it as balance. So I like your phrase of ebbs and flows. where there are times where there are periods where I have the time to make that kind of more consistent commitment, and there are times that I can't, and I feel like, am I missing out on my own health because of other things? Like when like I coach my daughter's soccer teams, and that's probably a period of 10 weeks that, you know what, I just don't get to do as much other exercise things because that takes up 6 hours of our week kind of thing. But as soon as soccer season ends, then I theoretically can get back to doing those things. So I would not have described it as balance, but I think I'm gonna like give myself permission to not have to do it every month. I'm gonna kind of like take on your ebbs and flows and incorporate it when I can and when it makes sense.
I think the reason I feel a little more comfortable with that type of approach is, but I think I realize, and I'm sure most people do as well, it's really tough to get all of this stuff in order. Life is full of just so many competing deliverables and competing assignments to our time that to get everything in line is tricky. And things are evolving, kids show up and grandparents need attention, or job situations change. Life is in a total sense of flux. But understanding that that can happen and then trying to pull back to a more even keel situation is kind of the best one can do, perhaps. But also I realize that if I'm slowly heading towards a direction that makes all of this easier, I feel a little better. And that's how at least I give myself a bit of consolation.
Okay. So as we wrap up, do you have any kind of final thoughts on your own mental health, physical health, on things that you observe with clients that you'd like to pass on to others?
I think the notion is we all have long lives to live, and not everything needs to be solved instantly. But whatever we can do to kind of nudge ourselves in the right direction, I think slow changes over time are perfectly okay. And over time, slow changes can have dramatic effects. So I think that's the philosophy I kind of bring to the table when it comes to mental and physical health, and also frankly well-being in general. Even if you look at the financial side, you can be a complete mess with a lot of these things, but if you slowly make changes, you can pretty much get to where you need to.
Okay. I think my final thought is that I make a specific effort to meet up with friends and clients for lunch. That's just one of the things I really enjoy, and that feeling of breaking bread with people that I care about has been really important. I thought about it more in terms of the friends, family, community side, but I can see the mental health benefits there. But kind of like our discussion on lean fire and fat fire and how it can be taken to extreme, I think it's okay if you apply kind of common sense and middle ground to enjoy a cookie every now and then, as long as you don't go down that path of eating all the cookies and never exercising. It's kind of, you can apply common sense to enjoy the little things in life. That's my version of stopping smelling the roses, is that I enjoy cookies. And so I kind of make sure I exercise enough that I can continue to enjoy cookies throughout my life.
I like that. I feel like having a cookie now.
Maybe wait just a little bit. Like don't this is the marshmallow test. Wait till tomorrow to see if you still want the cookie.
I like how we're pulling in all the advice that we're throwing out there. All right, I'll write it down. I'll make a note of it, and we'll see how well that cookie tastes mañana.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Trishul. It was great talking to you today, and I hope the rest of your week goes well.
Thanks, Aaron. Great talking to you as well. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate you tuning in to our show. And of course, if you like what you heard, do subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. And we'll be back again soon.
Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical as no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.